A summary of David Clark withdrawing from the Bierton Strict and Particular Baptist Church in 1984 over matters of conscience. Having written an account of my secession from the Bierton Strict and Particular Baptist Church over matters of conscience on the 26th of June 1984, this is the sum of my findings. The Bierton Church was formed in 1831 and became a gospel standard cause on the 16th of January 1981. In 1982, I was called by the Lord and sent by the church to preach the gospel. My application to preach was sanctioned by Mr. Hill of Luton and Mr. Hope of Reading, both ministers and pastors of gospel standard churches. I was licensed to preach and sent by the church to go wherever the Lord opened the door for me to preach. I was also appointed as church secretary and corresponded with all our ministers, including those who withstood our work. This enabled me to examine those serious charges levelled at the church for holding to serious doctrinal issues once we became a gospel standard cause. Our alliance with the Gospel Standard Baptist was seriously opposed by those outside our church, as is demonstrated by Mr. Kenneth Dix, who was a strict Baptist historian and pastor of Dunstable Baptist. See Chapter 4, Visitors and Strict Communion, Let Christian Men Be Men. His response typified the opposition against Gospel Standard Baptists. I was left to resolve those serious charges levelled at our church for joining the Gospel Standard list of churches. Those who opposed us were evangelical, other strict Baptists, Congregationalists, and we were labelled hyper-Calvinists, these being what we call full-right Baptists. Hyper-Calvinist being a term that really means nothing at all and used by uneducated Christians who are less Calvinistic than them and only suggests one is more Calvinist than someone else. I have shown the Bierton Church were unable to maintain a faithful testimony to the truth of the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ as outlined in our church's Articles of Religion and set out in our indenture and trustee dated 1831, or the Gospel Standard Articles of Religion. As a result, I seceded from the church on the 26th of June 1984 over matters of conscience. However, due to our strict rules of membership and traditional church ruling relating to church membership, I remained a church member, as the church did not terminate my membership or that of my wife. We remained church members, as the church did not terminate our membership. It was the church's wish that we should return. The church had failed us and were bound to preserve and keep to the doctrines of particular redemption, but it failed to do so and continued to allow the other male church member to teach general redemption, as is recorded in the Bierton Crisis 1984 and Let Christian Men Be Men. Despite my many failings and serious fall, I was recovered by the Lord and continued my work as a minister of the gospel, not only in England but also in the Philippines and now in Pakistan. Upon hearing the closure of the Bierton Chapel and the decease of all its members on return from mission work working in the Philippines in 2002, I was encouraged by Mr. Paul Crane of Lakenheath, our appointed church overseer of the Bierton Church, to return and reopen the Bierton Chapel. On approaching those who I understood to be the lawful trustees, who were the Association of Grace Baptist Churches Limited, I was refused permission to use our chapel. I soon learned that these were not the lawful trustees, as they had not been elected by the church. These were not lawfully elected trustees of the chapel because our trustee states that new trustees must be elected by the church. This association was unfamiliar with our traditional rule relating to church membership, as clearly spelled out in the Gospel Standard rules related to church membership. The association were also opposed to our doctrinal stand and position as a Gospel Standard cause, as they classified us as hyper-Calvinists. When seeking to resolve my claim against the association at the London County Court, they claimed I was no longer a church member and dismissed our traditional rules related to church membership as expressed in our Gospel Standard Rules of Conduct. They simply denied that I was a member. So, in light of that denial, I was not prepared to argue that I was and decided to leave the matter to the Lord to deal with. They went ahead and registered the Bierton Chapel trust deed with the HM Land Registry by producing a memorandum of appointment of new trustees that took over from the existing lawful trustees elected by the church in 1976. This was signed and dated on the 5th of February 2003. This was after all the church members had died and without notifying Mrs. Holloway or myself, who were the remaining two of the original 7 members of the church, alive, and after ignoring my request to give full proof that they were the lawful trustees. They simply ignored me. This memorandum of appointment of new trustees was unlawful and was contrary to the trust deed of the Bierton Church, as they had not been elected as trustees by the church. They finally sold our chapel in 2006. This was a serious error in law, which needs to be corrected. The Bierton Chapel is now a domestic dwelling, and the monies raised from the sale disposed of, which in the event of all church members dying should have been paid to the Particular Baptist Fund Trust of London, founded in 1717. Despite all these awkward and difficult workings of religious men, my work as a sent minister of the Bierton Strict and Particular Baptist Church continues, not only in the UK, but also in the Philippines and Pakistan, and I maintain that the funds from the sale of the Bierton Chapel should be returned to the Bierton Church in order to continue its calling and the work entrusted to me as a sent minister of the Bierton Strict and Particular Baptist Church.